had a kind of a musical kinship. He was one of the few people who, when he met me, said he actually liked Mr. Epp.
I joined a band called Numa, and I left that after just like a couple practices because they told me I had to get all new gear. The guitar player was a real tech guy. He looked at my amp, said nope, looked at my guitar, said nope, this is good enough. So then right after that summer, I joined Mr. Epp with Mark.
The first time I met Mark Arm, I saw Green River, and it was a pretty awesome show. It was at the Central, and I remember walking up to him and saying, man, that was a great show, dude. I got some pot. You want to go smoke some?
At the time, the Green River Killer was in all the headlines.
I think it was just trying to be as provocative as we could be, and in retrospect, it's regrettable. It's what you do when you're 20 years old and obnoxious.
And I remember the first time I saw them, I was like, holy cow, like, what is Mark doing? He really was able to sort of express himself and let out his angst.
I mean, they went from being folks that I'd seen around town and who I'd do shifts with to being like rock heroes. There was a lot of stuff that went into what made Green River who they were. Some of the components were this kind of glammy metal.
You know, he definitely took that stage persona through into Mudhoney, sort of minus the sequin pants.
I do remember going to check out the early Green River shows and being really kind of blown away by them. Steve Turner was in Green River at the time.
We didn't really know Jeff Ament that well, but we'd seen him play with Deranged Diction, who we thought were cool, and he jumped really high and played through distortion. Seemed very important to us at the time. So Steve kind of went on this campaign to get to know Jeff by getting a job at the same espresso place that he worked at.
I could tell that Mark and Steve were into music and into kind of making something happen, so I went to a couple practices.
That's how Green River started.
The Rehab Doll album by Green River was the first record that Jonathan and I put out on Sub Pop in spring of '88.
We emptied our coffers of about, I think, $5,000, which was like a massive fortune for us at the time.
Now I wouldn't mind. That's just what I'm afraid.
And unfortunately, as soon as the band handed us the master tape, they told us they were breaking up. So that was kind of our grand opening release, and we realized we were probably going to go out of business within a month.
We're down in LA, opening up for Jane's Addiction and Junkyard.
I remember Stone and I were up on the side of the stage watching Jane's Addiction, just going like, oh my God, this is like incredible. And I remember Mark and Bruce coming up at different times saying like how lame they thought it was. And I remember thinking, wow. I think any hope that I had that, well, that I thought that, well, Green River could be as good as Jane's Addiction because Mark didn't like Jane's Addiction. For me, that felt like there was a big chasm there. I remember just being like kind of bummed. Like,
whether people say it's Jane's Addiction split them up, it's like, it was just a moment in time where it sort of became more evident.
And then when they split into Mother Love Bone and Mudhoney, there was no doubt that we were going to work with Mudhoney.
The separation that sort of launched Mudhoney, which is fantastic from a marketing point of view. It's like, the two sellouts went one direction and the purists went the other, and we've got the purists, and they had a fantastic band. Mudhoney was fantastic. We saluted them as soon as we saw them. We were like, wow, that's so much better than Green River was.
Green River broke up. I was like, what am I going to do now? The first thought that occurred to me was like, maybe I should call Steve. He was going to school up in Bellingham at the time, and I called him and I was like, hey, Green River broke up. Why don't you drop out of school? that is the day, New Year's Day 1988, that we mark as the beginning of the band. That's like the band's birthday.
The night before, everybody was kind of converging on the Seattle Center to go to the Coliseum to see Motorhead open up for Alice Cooper. Matt was coming into town for that show, so we figured, okay, we'll get together the next day with Matt.
It was really not a whole lot of thought. We weren't like auditioning, or there was very little thought to like. It came together really easily.
I was 20 at this point, so I couldn't buy beer. I walk in to the store with Matt, just kind of meeting him, and I'm like, hey, want to buy me some beer? I'll give you some money. And he's like, yeah. And I give him some money, and he's like, well, he grabs himself a half case of beer. He's like, well, I got mine. And I'm like, ooh, he's got his, it was a half case of beer. And I'm like, well, can you get me one too?
I knew of him just from other bands he was in, but I never really personally met him until I was in a car with him being taken to practice, and he steps in the back seat with me. I'm, hey, nice to meet you. He was wearing a beret. That's another thing I forgot about. Till just now, he was wearing a beret, and I'm like, oh, what's up with this drummer? But I fell in love with him.
Mudhoney can influence your very life. A rewarding experience that you shall never forget.
Steve and I were very into B-movies, psychotronic movies. One of those directors that we really liked was Russ Myers.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sex. You have just witnessed some scenes from Russ Myers' sadistically sensual motion picture, Mudhoney, A Taste of Evil.
Thought like, wow, that's a pretty cool name, and kind of stored it, like if I ever have another band, that might be a really good name to use.
You better get your hands out of there. You're going to get in trouble.
I haven't seen it for so long. It's the one with the preacher talking in black and white and spouting off all sorts of biblical nonsense. And there's a buxom blonde, white trash kind of lady running around the swamps, right?
There's a preacher. I don't know. It's boobs.
Steep with the flavor of evil.
I don't remember much of it other than that. Seriously.
For A Taste of Evil, see Mudhoney.
I remember Mark saying that he introduced himself, I think, to Dan Peters and told him he should join Mudhoney by pushing in front of him at some Seattle club in the queue for the toilet so he could vomit. And it was just like, we're starting a new band, it's called Mudhoney, like that,
Dan Peters, greatest fucking drummer in the world.
Nobody sounds like Dan Peters. You can hear drumming on anything, even if he's like, he's on a Mark Lanigan record or whatever sessions he's done. You can always tell in about 2 seconds, that's Dan Peters on the drums. I recognize that feel. I recognize that drum fill. I can totally tell by the way he's hitting the snare drum. Danny is completely unique.